Escape to the metaverse. Better act like you know. Yeah. You are now tuned into the Matthew Rizzle show. Yeah. Escape to the metaverse. Better act like you know. Yeah. You are now tuned into the Matthew Rizzle show. Yeah. Escape to the metaverse. Better act like you know. You are now tuned into the Matthew Rizzle show. Yeah. Escape to the metaverse. Better act like you know. You are now tuned into the Matthew Rizzle show. Yeah.
Hey everyone, before we begin this week's episode of the Matthew and Rizzle Show, just want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor, Proof of Beauty. Proof of Beauty is an experimental digital experience studio. The blockchain is their canvas and the tokens are their brush. You can learn more about Proof of Beauty by checking out pob.studio. You can follow them on Twitter as well at PRRF Beauty. That's PRRF Beauty on Twitter and pob.studio on their homepage to learn more about their projects like Hash, London, and Publico. Thank you and enjoy the show.
Okay, Abram, welcome to the Matthew and Rizzle Show.
Thanks for having me.
So excited to talk about 0xSplits and crypto splits and all that good stuff. If anyone that knows me over the past couple of years, they know that the concept of splits has probably been the number one thing that I've talked about, especially over drinks. Really excited to dig into that with you. But before that, could you just give us a little bit of a potted history of yourself, what you were doing prior to crypto and what kind of brought you into the space, and maybe end with the genesis of 0xSplits?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess depending on how far back we want to go, but from like the Boston area, middle-five kids, decided to come out to California for school. I knew I wanted to be involved in tech from a young age in some form or fashion. And well, the house that I grew up in, my dad and my mom had like an old barn. And so I was constantly kind of like fixing things and tinkering with like physical objects. And then when I got to school, you know, the dorm room didn't have as much space to tinker with. And so I started building like websites and apps. And that really kind of just was very addictive for me, building and designing websites and apps. And so in college, I started building a handful of different apps with some friends. And then out of college, started, talking to like angel investors. And long story short, one of the investors we spoke to, this group SV Angel, was more or less like, we really like you. We don't really like this idea. Do you want to come an intern for us for, a few months? And so the idea was to kind of see what the other side of the table was going to be like, and like the investor side coming from the early stage builder founder side. And that was just a really cool opportunity, I thought, at that point in my career. SV Angel writes very small checks into a large number of companies. And so, being able to meet with, it was probably about, 8 to 12 companies a day for, I was there for 6 years, and just meeting so many founders and then working with them, throughout their company, building, journey, if you will. And then, it was always kind of like tinkering with apps and building side projects. Sorry, my dog is kind of being a pest right now. So if I'm feeling distracted, that's why it is. Is any fun? We can edit that out, I guess. So
take notes.
So that I ended up sticking around at SV Angel for about 6 years. A lot of that time was just like spent on the investing side, working with founders in the portfolio, meeting new founders. And then the last 2 years, I started getting back into software development. And so we built an entire kind of operations platform for SV Angel. And so thinking through the product and like the different use case that we need to solve for. Salesforce is like enormous. And what we needed for this like 10, 12 person team was not that. And there really wasn't a good tool out there at the time. And a lot of VCs have actually started building their own internal software since then. But just had a really good time with that. And then in 2018, the the person who was running SVH at the time decided to turn it into more of a family office and not raise any more outside funds. There's a rather sudden move, and definitely like changed my view on just, I guess, working for somebody else and putting like so much trust into someone else for something as important as your own career and livelihood. Mm-hmm. And so knew I wanted to get back to tech in some form or fashion, didn't have a co-founder, didn't really know what that looked like. So I did what any sane person does. And I bought this like used cargo van. And for the next 4 months, I spent hours and hours on YouTube and turned this thing into a full on like tiny home. So I did, the insulation, solar, electrical, plumbing. It was a journey. And it was definitely the biggest physical build undertaking I had worked on.
And you have to send pictures after this, man. I would love to see.
I documented the whole process just because I found that, I had no idea what I was doing going into it, and just the amount of like content on YouTube and these blogs explaining in detail what they did was so valuable to me that I wanted to do that and give back in that way. And so I can definitely send over a blog that walks through it. I will warn you, it's a bit lengthy, but you can at least see the photos, and the photos kind of, go through the process of like bare bones, like bare cargo van to like full on tiny home. And then I lived in the van for about 6 months. I was doing some consulting work for this family office in the Bay Area. And so I kind of knew I would come back to San Francisco at some point, but wasn't really on a specific timeline. And the work I was doing was very flexible and remote. And I like could travel around within this van, all that stuff. So van life is a whole different topic if you ever want to chat about. I do have thoughts on that. Not as romantic as Instagram paints it out to be, but a really cool experience to just feel very, self-contained. Like my monthly burden was like so low. I didn't really need to work at that point. So it was just like a cool, like kind of mental break. And I was going through some like family changes at the time. So it was a very like cathartic experience. And then once I got back to San Francisco, I was like, all right, let's start figuring out what the future has in store. I knew the work for the family office wasn't going to be long-term, but had a great relationship with the person who was running it. Will, who is my co-founder in Splits, he and I have been friends since 2016 or 17 when he moved out to SF. A mutual friend had it was like not founder dating, but it was like founder setup, I guess. Our friend Tommy had set up a game of Settlers of Catan and invited me and Will and someone else. And I remember just like that first like game, just like getting to know Will and being just like so impressed by him. And, obviously he's like incredibly smart and charismatic, and just like his views were like super interesting. And I messaged Tommy afterwards just being like, hey, like who is, Will, he seems great. And he was like, yeah, like I actually wanted you guys to meet. So it was kind of funny in hindsight. And so we have Tommy to thank for a lot of splits at this point. But Will was working, his background is more in like the deep tech, like machine learning, AI space. He, I think, actually started like mining crypto back in like 2016, 2017, bought a bunch of GPUs, realized that as the market crashed, it was no longer profitable to mine crypto, and figured a lot of other people were in the same boat. And so built out this kind of like peer-to-peer GPU marketplace, which is similar to an offering that Google has at this point, and they offer it for free, which is like a big reason why Will was shuttering it when I was kind of getting back to SF after the whole van trip. And I kind of pitched him on it. I was like, hey, Will, why don't you come and work for this family office with me? We can be this 2-person team, because I cover kind of like, product design, front end, like visual design. He cover in some of the front end programming, and then he covers all like the back end architecture. And so we really meet like, in the React code. And so between the two of us, we're able to kind of be this like, full stack developer team. And Michael, who was running the family office, like could have definitely used the help. There were already like maybe 15, 20 software engineers on the project. And so our task was to kind of like build out these MVPs similar to the software I had built at SV Angel, and just try them out. And then if they work, then we could get into, handing it off to the bigger team. Long story short, we both knew it wasn't like a long-term thing, but this was like a way for us to kind of in a risk-free way try, hey, what would it be like for us to like start our own thing together?
Mm-hmm.
And that just like went really well. We had a really good dynamic there. And we were able to like ship things pretty quickly. And then let's see, like late 2020, we were leaving the family office and kind of knew, well, we had some ideas that we were playing around with around like solo GPs, these kind of like angel investors, like building tooling and structure for them. Because we think like when you push capital to the edges, that's going to be where the most interesting opportunities are. And then it seemed like in our free time, like we were both just like sending each other like articles about like crypto and Web3 and what was going on with like NFTs at the time and these like bonding curves and all this stuff. And we were just kind of one day, like look at each other and like, why are we not building something in this space? Like it seems so silly if we're both just like spending all of our time, like thinking about it, but we're not, or like, and we have the ability to build whatever we want and yet we're not building in it. And so we started playing around with some like different developer tools, like got hard hat set up. Like, you know, the front end is really no different than what we've been used to building, like Vercel and Next and React and stuff. So it was really on the back end side. And once that, Will likes to use the term like nerd snipe. Like Will got nerd sniped by like crypto pretty hard, I would say, around that time. And then we went into this like dark forest of like, oh, like the design space is so big, you can build like a decentralized legal system, like, you know, not too dissimilar from like Claro. So you could like build all these prediction markets, which of course I've tried multiple times before. And, you know, those projects are like huge undertakings and not like quick builds. And so finally it got to the point where, you know, we just kind of were like, okay, we need to like ship a smart contract. Like we've never deployed anything to Ethereum. Like we just need to do that and see what that process is like. And there'll be a lot of learnings that will come from doing so. And so this was June 2021. We were about to like enter this like ETH Global Hackathon. At the time, Mirror had just written this incredible blog post about splits, and how they kind of, you know, saw it becoming more than just this like very simple routing item. And so we chatted with Dennis and Graham over there and we're like, hey, we really like this idea of a split. We think it's super compelling. We also think that there are some enhancements that we could make by focusing on this as more of like a protocol versus like a one-off smart contract, right? Mm-hmm. And so composability, gas efficiency, on-chainness, like Mirror's concept was incredible. And I think they did a great job outlining the potential for it. And we just wanted to kind of see if we could push that to its limits. And we had come up with an architecture that we thought was pretty interesting. And to make a long story short, they were more or less like, yeah, this is like kind of how we would do Mirror V2 if we were to like spend more time on it. And so they're like, yeah, by all means, like, you know, take this, run with it. You have our full support. And the Mirror community has been like very supportive of splits to date, which has been great. And so enter this hackathon. In 3 weeks, we like more or less shipped the full MVP. I think the night before the demo, like we were still connecting like hard hat events to like the front end. But we more or less had the whole flow kind of figured out. And plus when you're recording a video, you can kind of fudge it anyways. But chatted with the judges and all of them were kind of just like, why doesn't this exist? Like, you come into like crypto and you think like, oh, you can just like programmatically like split funds or like route funds. Like that seems so easy. And I remember talking to someone, this wasn't a judge, this was like, you know, a few weeks later. And, I was explaining to them what a split is. And he was like, not crypto native. He was like, oh, so you're just saying you're doing simple division. And it's like, well, yeah, at the surface, it is simple division. But the way the EVM works and how, you know, with like the high prices of gas at the time, like you have to be really thoughtful about like how you actually incentivize the system to run seamlessly without like one party having to take on a role that enables the system to function. And so the judges were super supportive. They were all kind of like, why doesn't this exist? Some of them were like, I have so many ideas for this. Like imagine if like a flash loan pays out to a split and I'm like Googling what a flash loan is. And so there's just like, I don't know, the opportunity seemed pretty exciting to us. And that gave us a lot of confidence to work on this full time. We ended up between the person who's running the family office and just like kind of my, you know, background at SV Angel, we ended up like pulling together a very small amount of capital to be able to work on this full time. We brought on another engineer, actually, this person, Mike, who has been incredible. Will and Mike have been friends since first grade, like same middle, elementary school, college. Their wives are actually pregnant and both due on the same day, which is funny. Also worrisome for me, but we'll get through it. But yeah, we ended up, launching in February, and just like seeing the community reception since then has been crazy. Sorry, I just ranted for a very long time, but maybe I'll pause there.
Yo, it's good. Your background is very interesting, man. Like full disclosure, Matt loves your project so much that like for a while I thought Matt was working for you and just like hadn't let me know or something. He's just like constantly talking about it. Dude, like, I mean, honestly, I have the same question that all these other people have, and maybe you like answered it along the way there, but like in a sea of like projects and things being launched that like seem so purposeless and pointless and like, maybe inch the tech forward, like this seems like something that is so easy to understand that like everybody wants. I can't even think of like any reason why someone would say like, nah, we don't like really need something like that. It just seems like such a glaring thing that was missing. So what do you tell people when everyone's like, why hasn't this existed? Is it because like it's just much more complex to code than the concept is to understand, or like how come no one has really like done a lot with these concepts?
I think that is a great point, and we haven't asked that a number of times, as you may imagine. I think it comes down to three things in my mind right now. First of all, I think a lot of what's happening in crypto today is replicating what has already existed and been possible in traditional finance and in the real world. I think that's a really great way to onboard new people when it's saying, hey, this is some idea that you already know, but like on a blockchain, like that will attract people, I think, because, for the most part, if you believe in the future of a decentralized blockchain, then it's like an easy concept to grasp onto, and you might be probably more excited about it because you've seen it succeed in like, I don't know, the real world, Web 2, whatever you want to call it. So I think we're still like seeing a lot of projects that are just replicating what has already been done and what already exists. That's number one. I think number two, it's like often not talked about, but like a killer use case of crypto right now is the fact that it's like tied to a financial like amount, like the US dollar or a currency. So a lot of people see crypto as a way to make money and get rich, right? And they see all these like crypto punks and these different NFT drops happening. It's like they want to do the same thing. And I think there's just like a lot of financial incentive. We don't know how Splits is going to be monetized, right? We want this to be, it is a hyperstructure. We want it to be community owned over time. And we don't know exactly the right way to create value for the community of people who are using it. It's clear that we are providing value at this point. But how does Splits actually accrue value is a different story. And so we're not taking that like purely financial motivation. We're excited about building something that provides a lot of value and think that there will be a really great way to monetize that over time. But we don't know what that looks like yet. It's very much unclear at this point. And so I think that like financial motivation isn't there yet either. And then lastly, the third point that I would say is, I think if you look at the most comparable item or object in the real world to a split that exists, it's like an LLC probably. And that's like a really, really not very similar object as compared to a split. And I think we're just starting to scratch the surface of like, okay, what are like truly like crypto native products that can be built, that cannot be built without crypto, right? And so if you think about taking out different loans and all these like financial primitives, like most of those like can be done in traditional finance in a very permissioned way. And we're just doing them kind of permissionlessly within crypto Web3. Whereas I think a split is one of those things that like it couldn't exist in the real world. I mean, like an LLC is, a pain to set up, a pain to maintain, requires all these legal fees. There's like, the reason you do it is because there's a potential for arbitration. What a split is saying is like, oh, we're removing the potential for any arbitration by codifying this upfront right now. And so I think it's just like, I think we're still in the early days of seeing things that are truly crypto native that could not have been done before. And our hope is that we'll see, and we're very optimistic that we'll see a lot more of these things emerge.
Yeah. For me, thinking about splits, again, you always have these conversations where people are like, that's not a thing already. Like,
Right.
you get that default assumption where they think it's possible, and it has not been until y'all really came on the scene and made the UI so user friendly. Honestly, it's almost as easy to set up a split as it is to just get any old crypto wallet set up, which is easier than setting up email today, essentially. You're comparing it to like an LLC. I'm thinking about it even more dumbed down than that, and saying it's like, if splits give you the power of a finance team and like an army of accountants in your fucking pocket today, like all the things that make a corporation run in terms of paying out employees, paying people, which we rely on these finance teams and accountants to do, like splits do that automatically, which is crazy. It seems very boring because finance and accounting are like whatever, everyone hates them. But when you realize you can totally obviate them out of the picture, it's like, wow, some really interesting things can become possible. And I'm just wondering if you can, like, real use cases or ideas that are practical today that you've thought about in terms of applications of splits, kind of diving into that may be a good way to kind of elucidate like the real potential behind splits and how people can actually use them today.
Yeah, for sure. Could definitely dive into that. I think one thing to touch on that you just mentioned that is interesting is, Will and I were chatting with someone the other day who's kind of loosely affiliated with like some pretty large NFT projects. And, the conversation eventually went to, disperse.app, like a multi-sender versus splits. And as Will and I were kind of talking about this after the fact, it's almost like if you are comparing the two, like you should probably just go with Disperse app, right? Because like one requires trust and one doesn't. And like that is an enormous difference, right? And if you're looking at it from the gas perspective, like yes, they're comparable. But what like we didn't really talk about in that conversation was like, okay, but you're not thinking about like the amount of money that you're paying that accountant, that you're paying that finance team. Like that's not a gas cost, but that is for sure a cost that you incur. Yeah. And that should be considered if you're thinking about the total cost of using something like Disperse versus using a multi-send, right? Like the trust aside, Disperse app is like, and if you actually remove the cost, the gas cost from it, Disperse app is much more expensive because it like requires human time, and those humans are very much not cheap. Yeah. And I think that a lot of people are just like, oh, like I'm just looking at this like gas estimate, like these are comparable. And it's really, I think if you take a higher level look, it's quite different. But again, I think we're just early. So I mean, the applications that we're seeing today are not too surprising. Like the biggest one has definitely been groups of people, between 3 and maybe 7 people, 8 people coming together, working on an NFT project. It may be a song, it may be, a PFP or just like any piece of art. And they will direct both the primary sales and secondary sales to the split that kind of represents their team, right? And so it may not be, 10% times 10 people. It's usually a little bit more granular than that, with maybe the main artist taking 40% and the accompanying artists each taking the remaining 60. And so that has been a pretty interesting use case. And one of the fun things is, I think when we launched in February, and I remember Matthew, like you reached out right away and we're just like so excited about this, which really, gave us a lot of excitement too. But it's a lot of people saw that announcement and then they went through, created a split, put maybe $50, $100 through it, made sure it worked, and then we're dormant for like 2 or 3 weeks. And that audience is now starting to come back and use the splits that they created a few weeks ago or create new splits and now distribute like pretty meaningful funds through them. Mm-hmm. And so since launch about 6 weeks ago, over $6 million have like flown through the protocol. And so we're pretty excited about that. that indication of just like, hey, we are providing or splits, excuse me, or like providing like real value to the community. And a lot of that value is coming through, NFT projects of like small groups of people collaborating. They may still have a Gnosis multi-safe being set up that they're using. Splits are not the only tools that they're using, but it's definitely becoming a core part of their kind of like tool chest. Another piece is actually on the like kind of platform and integration side. So sound.xyz, I think Mint Songs has some cool stuff coming out, Catalog, a lot of these in the music space, they have their own applications, their own UI, they partner with artists. And now those artists in sound can actually go through and create a split. And that uses the 0xSplits contracts underneath. And so that type of application has been a really interesting use for splits as well. We've invested a lot of time into our documentation, into, the audit, kind of just like working with developers to make it as easy as possible for those developers to integrate splits into their own products. And so we're starting to see a lot of that work, come through and be shown. And then the other, I would say, piece is a little bit more of this like esoteric, where do splits go from here? Like how can we push the limits of this idea of a split? And that's like a really, really interesting space for us. And I don't know if Matthew, we've talked about this before, but to give you a sense of kind of like one of these ideas that we're building out right now, and why Will is unfortunately not on this call, is this idea that we're calling like a liquid split.
Mm-hmm.
And so right now, the three of us are on this podcast, and maybe we're going to say, let's split proceeds that this podcast may receive three ways, assigned to each of our wallets. And that is great. I mean, that's like how it works today. It's like useful. It's being used by a bunch of people. But that also like prevents me from ever being able to like trade my portion of the proceeds. And so this idea of a liquid split is that instead of pointing the proceeds to a specific address, you're actually pointing the proceeds to NFTs, essentially, to like tradable objects. And so maybe there's 1,000 NFTs. Each NFT represents 0.1% ownership in a split. And so each of us would get a third of those NFTs to start. And then a year down the road, maybe I need liquidity and I sell half of my, NFTs to someone else. And now that person is going to start receiving half of, the proceeds. So now 1/6 of the proceeds of, from this podcast. And so this idea that a split isn't necessarily attached to the person, but instead it's attached to the person that owns or holds these NFTs is an idea that we're super excited about. And this, I don't know if you two are familiar with Songcamp, but that's like one of the coolest projects I've come across. I think the team over there that's organizing it and kind of are the stewards are just incredible community people. And Matthew Chaim, who's one of the kind of like, leaders of it, reached out pretty early on and was like, hey, we have this idea of, master rights in the music industry. And so if you own the master rights to a record, you could sell that to someone else. And now that person, will start to receive the royalties and proceeds from that record. And so he was like, could we do that? Could we do that with splits? You could, if you have this idea of take a step back, I guess, and I'm not sure if everybody here knows this, but we added this idea of a mutable split, which
Mm-hmm.
means one address that you specify can make changes to the split in the future. And at first, Will and I were really hesitant to do that because in many ways, I kind of like remove some of the trustlessness component of the split. If the three of us are on a split and I'm the controller, I could kind of just, rug pull you guys and change your ownership percentages. And after talking to people, they're like, yeah, but if you make that, there's like some social pressure. If you make that controlling address a multi-sig, right? Like that still provides, a lot of trust in the system while making it more flexible. And it was Matthew who came to us and was like, well, if you can make that controlling address, an EOA, a multi-sig, like any smart contract, like you can just make that another contract address. And now you can start to modify the split based on other on-chain data. And that's an area that we are, I think, like just starting to explore. Liquid splits is this first, avenue that we're going in. But I mean, you could imagine like the way a VC fund works, right? Once you pay back your LPs, the GPs get like 20% of the profits. Like that's a very simple contract to build that could live above the split and just modify the split once 100% of your investors' funds have been repaid. And so we think that there's just like a lot of potential around that idea of like, okay, can you build custom smart contracts that have logic in them that modify the split based on other on-chain data? Liquid splits is going to be the first one that we're building out, but there are a bunch that the community has come to us with ideas around.
So, Abram, man, one of the things that I appreciate and love so much about this project is it's such like a cut the middleman out project. Nothing like super personal against like, the personal lives of middlemen and women, but it really does like, there are just so many implications of like, ways this simplifies like so many things. So like, 10 years down the line, man, let's pretend, the whole world is more crypto native and, we're farther down the line with this project and everything. Who's losing jobs over this project, man? Like, who does this like replace first, second, and third type of thing? I imagine you've given it some thought about like, who becomes unnecessary if like this, concept in general, not even necessarily this project, but like just continuing to like go down this rabbit hole with split contracts.
I really haven't given that a ton of thought. I think we've touched upon it a little bit, but I think the real, or one of the real values of a split contract is that it reduces a lot of the manual, tedious work, the work that nobody necessarily really enjoys doing. I think it opens up a lot of opportunity for people to focus on more creative work instead of just like manual data entry and like double checking to make sure, all these numbers are correct. I would imagine that, splits at scale when more projects, when more people and more projects are integrating splits into their own lives, it really reduces a lot of the need to like double check your accounting and do these like manual distributions, trusting other people that they're not making mistakes, like double checking other people's, numbers to make sure that they're right. And so that's a good question. I haven't really put a lot of thought to like, who does this actually replace as much as, what are some of the longer term implications of what a split enables. And I think on that, we believe we're in the very, very early stages of on-chain collaboration. I mean, at this point, Zora's V3 contracts are the only contracts that allow an NFT creator to specify an address other than their own as the payout recipient. That seems like so obvious, in hindsight, that like, oh, like if I'm the one minting this NFT for the three of us, like I don't want the proceeds to come back to my wallet. I want it to go to like our joint split wallet or Gnosis multi-sig or what have you. And so I think we're just like in the very, very early days of on-chain collaboration. And for that to flourish, you need something like a split. Because if the three of us are going to work on a project, like that might be okay because I more or less know you two and we haven't met in person, but we've chatted a few times. And so I like have some trust there. But imagine if when Will and I were building this MVP at a hackathon and I didn't know who Will was, I just knew his like Twitter handle or, I didn't even know his real name. Like, why would I trust him, to split any, proceeds that we may earn together? And so I think it just lowers the barrier of collaboration, and allows people to work together who may not even know each other, right? They may not know where they are. They may not know their actual names or identity. They just know, hey, you're a really talented, community manager, you're a really talented designer or engineer. And now you just set up a very simple split, and you kind of have that protection in place.
Love it.
And real quick, Nifty Gateway allows creators to change for the on-chain payout portion, the address that funds go to. That just happened today though. So like, of course, it's not like we'll spread. I thought about the question that Rizzle asked quite a bit, doing my taxes this year. And like my frustration peeps out here and there on Twitter, just like throwing shade as much as I can at accountants and the IRS in particular. And like splits themselves, they have a lot of properties similar to like how countries in Asia in particular, like when it comes to precision withholding, operate in a sense. And it's like, well, when we're getting paid on-chain for on-chain revenue, it's like, damn, I really wish the IRS had a ENS handle, like it's really theirs, or IRS.eth or whatever, that like just 20, whatever, like fixed rate that would need to be withheld that I received just go straight to the IRS to fucking cut out all the inane kind of reporting that we have to do. But then like going a step further, it's like, wow, why do we even need a body like the IRS to receive funds and like redistribute them to wherever their final destination should be, right? Like honestly, what splits present in a very, very long-term perspective, if a couple assumptions hold, like more people coming online, making money with their friends on chain, like there is an incredible opportunity for capital generation and revenue generation online that people then have in control and custody themselves, so that they should be able to send funds easily via splits to the final destination. Like they're the ones in their local community that probably know what needs help. It just the function of what these intermediaries have done to date in terms of collecting funds and distributing them, then their function, instead of doing all that heavy lifting, because it won't be a heavy lift at all, would be just be to verify like where money should go and just say, hey, like these are funds that are like approved or that are above board, that aren't shady or something like that, so that like the citizens themselves can make these decisions about what to fund in their local community, in their federal constituency, in their like private lives, in terms of routing portions of their income, their revenue to places for public purposes or for private purposes. It's really, really incredibly far reaching. I think that's what really gets me super excited about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that, I think you said it far better than I could. And in this idea of, giving away a portion of what you will have in the future versus giving away a portion of what you have today, I think is really interesting to explore, just around like loss aversion and the psychology of that. For me to say, hey, I'm going to donate $100 of my current funds to, this cause that I care about, or this local, group that I care about, is still like money out of my pocket, which is like harder for someone, any animal, to like give up. Whereas if I'm saying, 0.1% or some small percentage of all of the future income, it's like, well, I don't have that yet. So it's easier to give that up. Plus I only give it up if I know I'm going to have it. So I'm not committed to, just like money out. And I think that's a really powerful idea when you combine that with what you just talked about, is like, public goods funding and giving back to the communities, and doing that, at both a very high and low level. That's a super interesting application.
Yeah. But like at root, this trust, this collaboration that splits, just help facilitate and really make reality. Obviously artists have started there first, but anyone else making money on the internet with friends can really benefit from splits. If they're with a group of folks that are doing something that they're getting paid in crypto with, it just makes so much sense for them to, like, whatever agreement they already have standing, whether like folks split income equally or whatever the percentages are, to set up a split to remove that manual distribution, that liability, that point of failure, right, that the individual that receives the funds already like has, in terms of then having to manually distribute it. It just totally eliminates it. Like today, like with a couple clicks of a mouse and on the keyboard using the interface that 0xSplits has, it's really insane. And then from there, it's just, you're not worrying about, am I going to get paid? Those extra worries, those concerns, like, can I really trust the collaborator that I'm working with? It just go away. And it's just, it allows the participants, the collaborators, to focus on whatever they're doing, whether that's making art, whether that's building out an on-chain brand or anything like that. And it's those sorts of efficiencies that that get freed up from this super, super simple but really significant tool that will have compounding effects, I think, down the line, just because it is that much easier to make money online with friends. Broken record, but just so exciting to me. So we touched on liquid splits. In terms of anything else on the roadmap that you're willing to kind of like peel back the cover on and reveal, give us some alpha leaks, anything else that you're sort of like noodling on, or maybe a work in progress, maybe not fleshed out, so like no hard promises, but anything like that on the roadmap?
Yeah, we'll be, so liquid splits are coming in a few weeks. And then the other one that we're working on right now is a vesting module that it theoretically could live above any contract. So you could vest into, your own, EOA or, like a Gnosis multisig, but it's a vesting contract that's designed to flow into a split. And so, the idea would be funds can be committed to the split, but locked up and vested over, 6 months, a year, 4 years, what have you. That would, that we're pretty excited about that, just because we think like that's a pretty real application of, combining like collaboration with like long-term incentive alignment. And so got an exciting partner lined up for that one. Those are the two that are currently being worked on. The other, I guess, I'm not sure if I would call this liquid splits, because what we talked about was kind of like having this, 1155 or ERC20 or 721 that lives kind of like above the protocol and modifies the split based on the holders. It's like kind of top down. You could also invert that where, I could actually just say, we're going to split, 4 ways. The 3 of us each receive 20%. And then the remaining 40% is actually going to go into an NFT itself. And whoever has that NFT, can withdraw the 40% share. So it's not as tradable. I don't know what the term for this is, so maybe not liquid split, but it's still going to be another way to make the kind of like income from the split tradable. It just won't be as divisible, right? Because now it's just that 40%. Although I guess theoretically you could push that through fractional and then make that piece tradable. But yeah, those are a few of the ideas that are on the roadmap right now.
Dude, amazing. It's the widespread implications of like everything that you were working on are just like so fascinating to listen to, hear you talk about, and also will just be like so interesting to watch unfold as just more and more people start to, use this protocol. Dude, one of the things we love to ask our guests as we get towards the end is just what else they're interested in. Do you collect NFTs and have a collection of your own? Or are there other like projects that aren't necessarily directly related to splits that you're also really interested in on the side? Anything like that?
I've collected a few NFTs. They're mostly from either friends who I want to support, or I would say doing something like super novel that I haven't seen done before. Like, I don't know if you all saw like the reCAPTCHAs NFT, but I thought that was like such a cool idea of like, how can you, try to prevent or like add some like proof of humanity towards like these wallet addresses, and you have to like, solve this CAPTCHA or reCAPTCHA before you can like mint an NFT. I thought that was super cool. The Blockheads project, I'm like a huge fan of. They were like really early in like the, on-chain SVG generation with like swappable parts. So I collected a few of those. But again, just cause like I wanted to support that team, I thought what they were doing was fascinating. I would say the other, so a little bit of that, I would say, the other piece that I'm just like fascinated by, and I do think potentially like comes back to splits at some point, is just like what Juicebox is doing as combined with like the tiles.art project, right? So you have tiles.art is this NFT project, priced on a bonding curve, and then like the proceeds of that, at least part of them, are like going back to like funding the Juicebox DAO and development of Juicebox. And I think that's a really cool model for being able to fund projects. No idea if something like that would work for splits. But the idea of, some sort of like NFT that's based on, your address or like the address that mints it, even like it could evolve over time, I think is super interesting. So hopefully in the next few months, you'll see more kind of like, NFT SVG like generation coming out of the Splits team. We don't know if it'll be like directly connected with the Splits protocol or just, ancillary, but that's definitely an area that I want to explore more.
Honestly, everything you do, like I'll eat up. Really excited for everything that you're doing. And just as we get to the end here, before we go, just want to make sure that everyone that's as interested in this as I am, or even just a little bit interested, is able to follow everything that you and Splits are doing. So just hit folks with the handles, websites, all that good stuff.
Yeah, we're kind of 0xSplits, across the board. So 0xSplits.xyz, 0xSplits on Twitter. If you want to join our Discord, it's just chat.0xSplits.xyz. And we're still very early in this process. We, the more exposure, the more people that can be aware of this, the better. We found a lot of the, like all the stuff that we talked about on the roadmap of like liquid splits investing and how NFTs can be recipients. Like, those are not ideas that Will and I came up with. That was like people jumping in the Discord or DM us on Twitter and be like, hey, have you thought about this? And we're like, oh, like, no, we hadn't really considered that. Like, let's flesh it out and like figure out how we can make it possible. And so, we just want to get more people involved and if we can lend some development resources to like build, a light contract or modify, existing splits that they can work for their use cases, like we'd love to do that. So yeah, please hop in, please reach out.
I love that. Building together with the community. Such a breath of fresh air. Really, if for folks that have been in the space for a while, I think it should transport them back to the early days of NFTs, the early days of crypto, when everyone was building together. I really do feel like splits are that next new frontier, in a way that we've seen before with NFTs and just like DeFi and all these major movements in the space. So Abram, and then big shout out to Will in the backgrounds. Good luck with the baby. But just thank you so much for joining us, coming on Matthew and Rizzle show to talk about all the amazing things you're doing at Splits, and just keep on building, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm stoked to have the support from folks like you. So thank you.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to this week's episode. Just want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor, Proof of Beauty. Proof of Beauty is an experimental digital experience studio. The blockchain is their canvas and the tokens are their brush. You can learn more about Proof of Beauty by checking out pob.studio. You can follow them on Twitter as well at PRRF Beauty. That's PRRF Beauty on Twitter and pob.studio on their homepage to learn more about their projects like Hash, London, and Publico. Thank you, and see you in the next episode.